In the heart of a blizzard, when the world was white and silent, a woman heard a cry that wasn't meant to reach human ears. It was faint, fragile, forgotten by the storm. But she listened because some hearts are born not to turn away. This is the story of Willa Hart, a widow with no one left to hold and a baby left to die in the snow. What happened next brought two worlds together, one of blood, the other of choice. And neither would ever be the same snow. You're watching The Wild Step, and this is the cry beneath the storm came down the mountain like a beast unchained. Willa Hart had seen winters in Montana that would freeze the breath in a man's chest, but nothing like this. The wind didn't howl. It screamed angry and wild, battering the old log cabin until the shingles flinched. The trees bent low outside, dragged down by weight they were never meant to carry. Snow came not in flakes, but in sheets thick as wool and twice as cruel. Willa had just nailed shut the last window shutter, her fingers stiff with cold when she heard it. Not the creak of timber, not the hiss of wind clawing at the eaves. No, this sound was different, fragile, high-pitched. A cry, human. She froze, hand still gripping the iron nail. For a second, she thought the blizzard was playing tricks on her ears. But there it was again, faint, desperate, and heartbreakingly real. A baby. Without thinking, Willa threw on her coat, grabbed the lantern, and pushed through the door into the white abyss. The storm hit her like a fist. Snow stung her face and the wind yanked at her braids like it meant to tear her apart. She moved by instinct, vision was useless. The light from the lantern barely reached beyond her boots. 10 paces past the old fence line, her foot struck something. Willa fell to her knees, heart hammering. There, almost buried in the snow, was a bundle, cloth-soaked, frozen stiff. Red fabric faded but unmistakable. Her fingers trembled as she brushed away the ice. The bundle moved. A tiny arm reached weakly toward her, and then came another cry, no louder than a whisper in a graveyard. The child was barely alive. She pulled the baby into her arms, cradling it close to her chest, shielding its face with her scarf. The little body was cold, too cold, but not yet lost. Willa ran, boots pounding over snow and memory breath burning her lungs. Behind her, the wind howled, like it had just lost its prey. Inside, she lit the hearth to roaring, threw every quilt she had onto the rocking chair, and laid the baby down. The child was no older than 7 or 8 months. Male, skin the color of polished walnut. A gash marked his temple, dried blood frozen in a sharp line down his cheek. But it was the cloth he was wrapped in that caught her breath. It bore the sacred symbols of the Kiowa spirals, moons, and protective lines woven by hand. Willa had lived beside the Kiowa territories all her life. Her late husband Samuel had once traded horses with them, before the treaties broke, before the white men came with rifles and fear. Her hands moved on their own, trained from years of being a midwife and a mother once long ago. She laid a wet cloth on his forehead, murmured nonsense lullabies into the firelit air. Songs she hadn't sung since her own son had gone quiet in a fevered sleep years ago and never woke up. The baby stirred, a breath, a twitch, a sound like a creek murmuring beneath thick ice. And then silence. Willa sat beside the fire the rest of the night, the baby wrapped in her shawl, rocking slowly in her mother's old chair. Outside, the storm raged on uncaring. But inside that cabin, two hearts beat together, one tired, one fighting, and the walls held them in like hands cupped around a fragile flame. She didn't know whose child it was. She didn't know what would come for him, but she knew this: he wouldn't die tonight, not on her watch. By the second day, the snow had begun to lose its fury, softening into a heavy silence that clung to the land like regret. Willa hadn't left the baby's side. She had no name for him, just little one whispered between sips of broth and the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in the quiet. His fever had broken in the early morning hours, his skin flushed and damp against her shoulder. He clung to her like he'd always known her scent, his tiny fingers curling around her collar as though afraid she'd vanish if he let go. But Willa was not going anywhere. She was boiling water for another cloth when she heard hoofbeats. Not many, just one horse. She moved quickly, tucking the baby in a quilt, laying him in a basket near the stove. She opened the door to find a rider approaching through the mist of melting snow. The man was gaunt, his face sun-chapped and grizzled. Tom Jarvis, her nearest neighbor. He lived 4 miles east and drank enough whiskey to forget he had a wife buried in the cottonwoods. "Willa," he said, reining in his horse. "You all right?" "Fine," she replied, curt. "Thought I saw tracks near your property yesterday. Looked fresh." Before the storm hit, she squinted at him, "Likely mine." Tom sniffed, shifting in the saddle. "You see anyone out here, strange folk?" "Only strange one I see is you, Tom." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Word is a Kiowa hunting party vanished last week. Some folks think they were near the ridge. Willa's jaw tightened. This land sees plenty of ghosts, Tom. Don't go adding to them. He nodded once slow, but he didn't ride off. His gaze flicked toward the cabin window. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Finally, he turned and rode away. Inside, the baby had stirred. Willa lifted him again, held him close. His eyes were dark wide and impossibly still, as if he knew more than he could say. That night he cried, not from hunger, not from cold, from fear. She walked circles with him in her arms, humming a song she'd made up on the spot. She didn't remember when she started singing again, maybe the second night, maybe the first. But the sound came back to her like water over stone worn smooth by grief and time. When dawn broke, Willa changed his bandage. She noticed something she hadn't before: a necklace around his neck, nearly hidden in the folds of cloth. It was carved bone, etched with sun rays and tied with sinew, a charm for protection, a sign of sacred lineage. And then her breath caught. There, faintly sewn into the lining of the red blanket, was a symbol she couldn't mistake: the mark of the Red Hawk clan. Kiowa nobility. Willa's heart stuttered. She knew what this meant. She wasn't just holding someone's baby. She was holding someone's bloodline, a chief's child perhaps, or a warrior's only son. She glanced out the window instinctively. The snow was melting the land wet with secrets. And secrets she knew didn't stay buried long in thawing earth. She had taken a child not meant for her world, and someone would come looking. By late afternoon, the wind had stilled, and the sky turned an eerie, brittle blue, the kind that made you feel like something was about to happen. Willa moved like someone living inside borrowed time. Every step, every breath was calculated. She boiled more water, cleaned the baby's wounds again, rewrapped him in the red blanket, making sure the necklace lay gently over his chest. And then she heard it. Not hoofbeats, this time a knock, but not at the door. In her head, "What have you done, Willa?" She didn't answer the voice. Instead, she went to the rifle hanging over the hearth, pulled it down, checked the chamber. Full, ready. She didn't want violence, but she understood it. Her husband had been a soldier. She knew the weight of waiting. That night, she moved the baby into the basket again, tucked beside the stove, and sat near the door. She didn't sleep. Her hand rested on the rifle stock. Her eyes stayed on the window where the shadows outside moved like breath. Somewhere after midnight, they came. 3 figures, not neighbors, not settlers. They rode without sound, buffalo hides draped over their shoulders, faces marked with paint that glimmered in the moonlight. Their horses didn't whinny or stamp. They moved like mist, controlled, intent. Willa didn't move. She didn't blink. One of them dismounted and walked slow and sure across the yard. He paused at the coop, knelt, brushed his hand over the snow. Tracking. Her throat closed. He'd found the prints, the trail. Then he looked up at her window and bowed. Just once. Then Rose returned to his horse and disappeared with the others into the woods. No threats, no weapons, just a message. We know. Willa let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She walked to the basket, scooped up the baby again. He was asleep, cheeks warm now, breath steady. She pressed her lips to his head and whispered, "They know you're here, little one, and they didn't take you." She wasn't sure if she meant to comfort him or herself. The following day, she heard it again, this time, not silence. A roar of hooves. Not 3, not 5. Hundreds. She stepped out onto the porch, baby in her arms. Across the ridge, they came like a river of thunder. Warriors mounted silent and poised like the wind had called them. Every man upright, proud faces unreadable. And at the front, him. He wore a red cloak over his shoulders. Tall, broad. A scar traced from temple to jaw like a bolt of lightning had once kissed his face. He dismounted alone, walked through the melting snow without a word. Willa stood still. The baby stirred against her chest but didn't cry. When the man reached the bottom of the porch, he spoke, his voice rich and clear. "You saved my son." Willa nodded. "I did." He was not left by mistake. His mother died in the ambush. She wrapped him and hid him beneath a rock. We thought he had gone with her, but you heard him. Willa's voice caught. I heard him cry. He bowed his head once. You heard my blood scream. Silence passed between them like an oath. Then he asked, "Will you give him back to me?" She didn't answer, not yet. Instead, she asked, "Will you take him if I say no?" He blinked, then shook his head. "No, not by force. That is not our way." She looked down at the child who had fallen back asleep against her chest. "He doesn't cry when I hold him anymore," she said quietly. The man stepped forward, not to take the child, but to touch the boy's foot. Gentle, reverent. Then he looked into Willa's eyes. You are now part of his story. Willa didn't know what to say. The man's words hung in the morning air, soft but immovable. You are now part of his story. She held the baby tighter, as if her arms alone could hold back the tide of change. The warrior turned his head slightly, and another figure broke from the line of riders, a woman cloaked in deep blue, long braids swinging as she rode. She carried something across the saddle, a cradle board woven from willow and sinew adorned with beads and feathers that shimmered like frozen light. She dismounted, silently walked up the slope toward Willa. In her other hand, she held something small, a necklace, carved bone polished shell and the symbol of a hawk in flight. The man took it from her and stepped back toward Willa. He didn't ask permission. He moved with ceremony but no arrogance. And slowly, reverently, he reached beneath the baby's blanket, lifted the old charm from the child's neck, and replaced it with the new one. This is his new name, he said, a sign of life reborn. He looked at her with a kind of quiet knowing. And I give you a new name, too. Willa blinked. What name is that? His eyes didn't leave hers. Mother who hears. For a moment, the wind fell silent. Willa's throat tightened. No one had called her mother in years. Not since the fever had taken her own son. Not since she buried that part of her heart beneath soil and silence. The child stirred again, now cradled between her body and that name, Mother who hears. The man nodded, stepped away, and the woman approached with the cradle board. She offered it gently without a word. Willa hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. It was beautiful. Not as something purchased or traded. It had been made for this child. A belonging, a promise. The warrior spoke again. He will go with us at first light. Willa nodded, though her heart screamed. She already knew. She had known it since the moment she heard the cry in the snow. But for one more night, he would still be hers. That night, the cabin was both warm and unbearably still. Willa didn't try to sleep. She sat by the fire, the baby her baby for now, wrapped in a soft shawl and resting peacefully in her lap. She watched the flames dance and whispered his name to herself, the one she would have given him if it had been her right. Little Hawk, she said softly, brushing his cheek. That's what I would have called you. And though the child made no sound, his mouth curved slightly, like he'd heard her in some place beyond dreams. She kissed the crown of his head and rested her chin there, letting the silence fall like snowfall, gentle, sorrowful, and unspoken. At dawn, no hoofbeats came. Only one rider appeared, a woman. It was the same one from before. No cloak this time, just a rough shawl and quiet eyes. Willa stepped onto the porch, baby in her arms. The woman dismounted and met her gaze. His father waits, she said, but he does not wish to take him from your hands. That is not our way. Willa swallowed. Her voice was a rasp. I suppose I should say something. The woman shook her head. You already did. When you stepped into the snow. For a long moment, Willa didn't move. Her arms refused to let go. Then, as if sensing her hesitation, the child turned into her chest, nestled under her collarbone, and whimpered softly. Not pain, not fear. Recognition. And still she handed him over, slow, steady. Her arms burned with the letting go. The woman didn't speak as she mounted again. The child swaddled gently against her chest. Willa stood at the edge of the porch, eyes fixed on the red blanket, slowly fading into the mist. Then, without fully understanding why, she called out, "Wait!" The rider turned but said nothing. Willa walked inside, grabbed her old wool coat, slung the cradle board over one shoulder, and stepped off the porch with the quiet certainty of someone no longer questioning her place. I want to see where he's going, she said. The woman nodded once. No questions, no conditions. They rode together, Willa on her stubborn old mule, the Kiowa woman on a chestnut mare that moved like water. The land softened as they moved, snow melting into patches of muddy earth, sunlight spearing through clouds as if the valley itself had exhaled. They passed the creek, still half frozen, wound through tall pines that whispered above them like gossiping spirits. Then, after what felt like an hour of silence, the ridge opened into a clearing. And there, nestled between stone and sky, sat a village. It wasn't grand, it wasn't fearsome, it was alive. Children laughed, chasing dogs through the wet grass. Smoke curled from fire pits where women stirred pots and mended hides. A group of young men carved arrows under the shade of a cottonwood. The air smelled of cedar stew and stories older than memory. At the center of it all, he waited. The man with the red cloak no longer wore it. Instead, a simple tunic draped over his shoulders. His hair was braided and threaded with bone beads. He sat by a low-burning fire, his hands open still. When he saw them, he rose, not with ceremony but with gravity. The woman dismounted and brought the baby to him. He took his son without a word, holding him as if he held all of time. The child looked up, blinked once, and reached out, touching the scar on his father's jaw with soft fingers. The warrior's throat tightened. Willa stood at the edge of it all, heart thundering. Then slowly she dismounted and stepped forward. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just looked at the man and whispered, "You waited." He nodded. "I wait for what is mine, and I wait for what is sacred." The child nestled against his chest, calm as a morning lake. Willa stepped back. But the man stopped her, held out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a pendant of carved bone and turquoise, its surface etched with protective marks, its center shaped like a bird mid-flight. "He will know your name," the man said. Before Willa could respond, the woman from before stepped beside her and gently touched her shoulder. "In our tongue, we do not call you the white woman who saved him," she said. "We call you Talane, she who walks between worlds." Willa looked down at the pendant, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't cry. Not then. But she felt something shift, a thread tighten, binding her to a place, to a name, to a boy who once cried in the snow. "Then tell him," she whispered, "I didn't just save his life." She looked up at the fire, at the man, at the boy, now smiling into his father's beard. "He saved mine." Willa rode home alone. No baby in her arms. No words in her mouth. Just the steady beat of hooves in the hush of the trees watching her pass. The mule moved slower on the way back. Maybe it sensed the weight she now carried wasn't in her pack, but in her chest. The sky had cleared. Sunlight gleamed off melting snow like glass. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. She arrived at the cabin as dusk settled, lighting everything in gold. The house looked the same, roof patched with tin windows shuttered against the wind, but it didn't feel the same. Because Willa wasn't the same. She placed the pendant on the mantel just above the fire. Every morning after that, it caught the first beam of sunlight and gleamed like a promise. She kept the cradle by the stove, didn't cover it, didn't move it. The faint scent of milk and wool still clung to the quilt, and she let it stay. Like a shrine, like memory held in fabric. Each Sunday, she baked 2 loaves of sweet cornbread, one for herself, one for the flat stone near the creek. She never looked back after setting it down. But the second loaf was always gone by morning. Days passed, then weeks. Then on the 15th day, she heard them again, hooves. Not many, just 3. No thunder, no fear, just presence. She opened the door before they could knock. The same Kiowa woman stood at her step. No cloak, just a woven shawl and a bundle in her arms. Her eyes were warm, but her words were heavy. He was sick. The wound, it flared with fever. Willa gripped the doorframe. "But he lived," the woman added gently. "He cried for you." Willa blinked. "He said my name." "Not with words," the woman said. "But when we took the red shawl from him, the one you wrapped him in, he cried until we returned it. He knew your scent. And his father said a child should never have to choose between one love and another." The woman stepped forward and placed the baby, now stronger, alert, into Willa's arms. "He's not here to stay," she said, "but he's here to be loved." The boy looked up and smiled. Willa dropped to her knees, clutching him like a spark she refused to let fade. "You came home," she whispered. That night, the Kiowas set up camp not far from her land. 3 small tents, a fire, no weapons, no message beyond their quiet closeness. Willa brought stew water and an old storybook, even though none of them could read it. She didn't go to speak. She went just to be near, to say in silence, "You belong." In the morning, they packed up. This time when she handed the baby back to his father, she didn't ache. She wrapped him in a new shawl he had sewn herself with a small, stitched bird in the corner. The warrior saw it and nodded. "Now he has 2 winters," he said. "One in my blood, one in yours." He rode off. The boy looked back once, hand reaching toward her. Then they were gone. Spring came fast after that. The snow broke. The land softened. Willa lived, not waiting, not mourning, just living. But one day, tied to her door, she found a ribbon. Red, frayed, and attached to it a carving, a tiny bird with snow beneath its wings. She smiled, and for the first time in years, she sang while baking. Because even when silence returned, she was never alone again. Thank you for riding with us through the storm, for listening to the quiet kind of courage that doesn't make the history books, but leaves a mark on the heart. If this story moved you, if you believe that love can bloom even in the coldest winter, then help us keep these tales alive. Like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe. Here at The Wild Step, every story is a campfire, and you're always welcome by the flames.